Hello, everyone. Welcome to Orthodoxy. My name is Andy Schmidt. I'm your host. Just wanted to talk real quick about the Paradox Press, brand new publication that a business partner and I just started. It is a Christian conservative publication, kind of online magazine. We are doing a soft launch in this first 10 weeks of the publication. So we're just going to release one new essay every single week. That's completely free. You can go over there and read these for free. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can subscribe. All absolutely free. You'll get everything free in these first 10 weeks. And these essays are by some of the best writers in the country, maybe the best in the world. The first one was from Dr. Dale Ahlquist. He is the world leading scholar on G.K. Chesterton, which the whole publication was sort of predicated on the thoughts of G.K. Chesterton. He wrote on localism and that economic theory, but it's not boring. That sounds boring. It's not boring. It's very, very exciting stuff. It's economic theory, but it's for the masses. It's for the general person to read and understand, and it's very interesting. So it's not just this high-level academia. It's actually good, practical writing. That's the first one that came out. The second one that just came out by Dr. David Devil on being profit-pilled. He's called The Great If, basically looking back at the 20th century and learning from the people who warned us of what was going to come. People like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, C.S. Lewis, Schaeffer, G.K. Chesterton himself, and then seeing how those guys even were pulling from the great prophets of the Old Testament and of the Bible. And so warning us for what was going to come in the future and what we could do, what we could change. And so that's all at theparadoxpress.com, theparadoxpress.com. Go over there, take a look around, see what you think, and read through some of the articles. Subscribe, give us your email. We'll send all of these things to your inbox for free. But please, please, please go over there to theparadoxpress.com. Now to the interview. All right, I'm here with Philip Bunn from Covenant College or University. Is it Covenant University?
College, yep.
College. Okay. You're a political science professor, and we're going to be talking about East of Eden. I was just telling you before we started recording, I'm extremely excited. I have a ritual that I've been doing for 2 years where I just once or twice a week sit outside in the back patio, start a fire, and listen to East of Eden while I smoke a cigar for 2 or 3 hours. It has taken a very long time. I'm only on chapter 32, but it's like one of my favorite things that I do. And I've been looking forever to have somebody on the podcast to talk about the book because I think it's an important book and it's a fascinating book. So all that to say, I'm like, this is like, I've been looking forward to this. I'm very excited. So real quick, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, who you are.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, like you said, I teach at Covenant College. I teach political science. I mostly teach political theory, which is like the more normative side of politics. So the history of political thought, what have people said about politics in the past? What can we learn from that? But then I also teach American politics. So American government, constitutional law, executive and legislative branches, all that fun stuff. And so I kind of keep a foot in both worlds. I like to spend a lot of time with old dead people and what they said, but then also keep up with current events. So always something going on. But then I also have taught in the past and will definitely teach again at Covenant classes on politics and literature. So I often write and talk about novels and sort of how they can help us think about the kind of political topics that I care about. And so East of Eden is definitely one of my favorite books, maybe my favorite depending on my mood. And so very excited to talk about this today. Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of old dead guys, John Steinbeck. This is a weird thing because I'm 26, grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, not very
I went to school at UW-Madison for grad school.
Did?
So, yeah,
wow.
Yeah, so
okay.
That's awesome.
I don't know. Yeah, it's fine. I'm here, so I'm a little bit more bitter. But
fair enough.
The university, my wife went to the university. It's fine. It's gotten worse over the years. But anyways, there was no like the public school system. We were reading like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, like these weird, terrible, progressive books that had nothing to do with literature in general, but definitely not American literature. It was just bad stuff. And so, I never even heard of East of Eden until like a couple of years ago and started reading it. And I was like, where did this even come from? But John Steinbeck himself is an interesting character. So I think it's probably just safe to start with who John Steinbeck is. Who is he?
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting about East of Eden as a book is that Steinbeck is both, he's the author, but he's also the narrator and a character in the book. So the family that's described in the book, the Hamilton family, is the family that Steinbeck is descended from. Now it's fictionalized and he sort of dramatizes a lot of it, but there's a point in the story where Adam Trask goes to visit Steinbeck's mother, and then so she answers the door, and it says, little John is like peeking out from behind her skirt, so he's there in the story. It's really cool. But yeah, he grows up in California, and he gives us this wonderful insight, I think, into this peculiar period in American history. So he's born in early 1900s, I think 1902. I could be wrong about that, but I don't have an eidetic memory about this kind of stuff. But so he's coming of age during the World War I era, and then he lives through the Depression, and he lives through World War II, and so he gets to see, I think, one of the most transitional periods in American history. And a lot of his books are about this, right? You get the Dust Bowl narrative and Grapes of Wrath that many people are familiar with. But East of Eden comes later in his career, in his life, 1950s, 1952, I think. Again, I might get some of these days a little bit wrong, but so it's a late in life kind of reflection on where he grew up, the kind of life he lived there. And I think he said in an interview that, he intended this book to be like for his children or the people who come after him to be like, if you didn't live in the Salinas Valley in California in the early 1900s, this is what you should know. This is how it smelled and tasted and looked. And so in a lot of ways, I think it's like a quintessentially American book. It's this key period in American history. And it also kind of covers coast to coast. Like you have the Trask family that starts out in New England and then moves to California. And so you cover the whole scope of America through this book, which I just think is really amazing. So yeah, I'll be honest that my Steinbeck biography knowledge is kind of low. I did visit the Steinbeck Museum in Salinas, not I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago now, which I learned a lot. So I'm certainly no biographer of Steinbeck, but everything I know about him, he's wildly interesting. He did war correspondence like a lot of people in this era. Like he's a rich, interesting guy who wrote some interesting books. I'm sure there's lots of personal moral failings we could all object to, but it's just an era of American literature for sure.
Right. It's such a fascinating time because the more I read philosophers or novels or whatever or theologians from the mid to late 1800s into the 1900s, you start to realize that what was happening in that time period, philosophically, theologically, obviously politically, there were like things like the tectonic plates were shifting in the world and everything kind of broke open and changed with the Industrial Revolution. And so to grow up in that time period probably was exciting maybe, but also like very terrifying and probably very confusing. Like, where is this all going? And so I don't know much about the time frame, but that makes a lot of sense because he's able to capture. Like I'm from Wisconsin, so like I don't know anything about the Salinas Valley, but I feel like I do after reading some of this book, and so he's captured that very well. Let's just start with the beginning, I guess, or just with a general, like, what's the general storyline of East of Eden? What is this book about?
Yeah. So, the title comes from Genesis, right from the story of Cain and Abel. And the story really is what I like to call like a twice told retelling of the Cain and Abel story. And so the kind of hook of it is like, imagine you had Cain and Abel, but Cain, for whatever reason, failed to kill Abel. And then Abel goes on and has his own family and then kind of repeats the cycle. Like what happens? And it's wrestling with both the themes of the biblical narrative, right? Of Cain and Abel, both approaching God and both apparently, like wanting to serve God, but God rejecting Cain's offering for whatever reason. And that's one of the points of contention in the text. And then like, why are they the way that they are? And then imagining that sort of retold in a human, very, very human context in the contemporary world. And watching, the Abel figure see that happen again with his own sons, and seeing in his son a kind of Cain figure and his other son a kind of Abel figure. And so, it really helps, I think, to be conversant with the biblical story there, but also just like Steinbeck is wrestling with just general, I think, human questions of why are people the way that they are? Like, some people seem really, really bad. Some people seem, not so bad. Why is that? Is it because of their parents? Is it because of how they were raised? Sometimes kids raised in the same household, one's awful and one's great. Like, why does that happen? We all wrestle with this in some level or another. And so I think it's really poignant for that reason. So he's folding in, right, the kind of quintessential Americanisms, but also the biblical story, with some, tweaks and misreadings maybe, but like just in ways that I think are wildly compelling. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I feel like he's grappling with the predestination free will question all over the place too, just like to what you're saying, what is it that makes somebody just terrible? Because there's one particular character in this book that is just the worst person ever. And his description before, I think in the book, like he kind of gives sort of a philosophical breakdown of this character and is like, some people are just bad. And it's just like, that's just kind of what he says. It's just bizarre. Because some of it's very deterministic, but then at the core, which we can talk about later, but there's this idea of free will that is also there at the core, which is interesting. But okay, explain. So set the scene a little bit. Like, when does the book start? Who are the characters? Like, who are we following? You kind of explain the Hamilton family a little bit and the Trasks, but can you give a backstory to these people?
Yeah, sure. So we kind of enter the scene with these two different families on two different sides of the American continent. So we have the Hamilton family over in California, which again is the family that Steinbeck is descended from. And we get the patriarch of the family, Samuel Hamilton, who is one of my favorite characters in literature. And he's an Irish immigrant. He comes over with his wife from Ireland. They have their, brood of children. And one of the interesting things about Sam Hamilton and his family is he's living in this valley that in many respects is thriving and flourishing. It is a kind of Edenic paradise for many people because it, like, depending on the year, at least, the river, like the Nile, kind of feeds the valley and makes it very flourishing. Still today is one of the big areas in the country that produces a lot of our produce. And so it's a place that people want to be, but he himself has a plot of land that is unproductive. And so there's a point in the book where it says, like, his only crop that he ever raised was his children. It was a good crop. And that always gets me a little choked up because it's if you can't make anything come out of the land, the best you can do is raise some good kids, and he does. And then on the other side of the country, you have the Trask family, and so the Trask family starts with, you have the father, and this is embarrassing, I'm going to forget his name, but he gives birth to Silas.
Oh my gosh.
Silas?
Silas. Yeah.
Silas. It took me a second.
Let's just call him Silas. Hopefully that's what it is.
And he has two sons, Adam Trask, who's kind of, I would say that is probably the main character of the book outside of Sam Hamilton, and his brother Charles. And so Silas Trask serves in the Civil War, and he goes on like 2 weeks of campaign and then gets his leg blown off. And then while he's recovering, and then over the years that follow, basically invents this story of himself as this wild campaigner in the Civil War. He basically just lies his way into heroism. But along the way, as Steinbeck points out, actually learns a lot about military stuff and becomes integrated in the post-Civil War world and becomes a tactician and an advisor to politicians and makes a ton of money. And so there's this conflict in the Trask family of Charles and Adam. Adam does not love his father, and he says that very explicitly. He fears his father, but he does not love him. Charles loves his father and desires his affection, but his father decides to give his favor to his brother, and he just can't figure out why, and he's angry at his brother over it and tries to kill him, but he fails. His brother kind of escapes, and so the fallout from that, it just is the hook to the story, like what comes as a consequence of that. So and then we get introduced through that conflict between the brothers to this evil character of Kathy, who we can talk about, but she really kind of drives the narrative forward from there.
And it's also easy to remember the characters, like who's representative of Adam, because those are the A names, Adam, and then his son Aaron, and then Charles and Cal, and so that's an easy way to remember it. But I remember listening to the way that he described the fight between the two, where Charles was trying to kill Adam, and that the way that was, even his writing style, I don't know how he does it, but he's just got this wonderful writing style where it's like you can visualize the entire thing, and it's very interesting. So what are some of the biblical themes there, though, between Adam and Charles and their father? Because there's this idea that their father, he said he favors, did he favor Adam, correct?
Yep.
And then and so that's all coming from the biblical themes of Adam, or sorry, I'm getting this, all the names.
I know. The names get muddled.
Cain and Abel. Yeah, Cain and Abel, right. So what's there? The father figure is interesting, though, because he's in some ways representative of God, I guess, in that, or what is that?
In some way, yeah. Where like so Charles, he raises a crop and saves up money to buy his father a gift, which is a knife, and gives it to his father, and his father doesn't ever really use it, doesn't really say thank you for it, but then Adam gives him a kind of mutt puppy, and his father loves it, right? And so you get the kind of comparison to the biblical story of Cain providing offering of his crops of the field, and then Abel giving his lambs, and the father just prefers the puppy. And it seems kind of arbitrary to Charles, and it is kind of arbitrary in the story. Like, it's not really clear, except that the father figure, Silas, here says, like, he recognizes in Charles something that he doesn't want to cultivate. Like, there's something about Charles that is like a little off. He's a little messed up. He's a little violent. He knows something's wrong with him. He favors Adam because Adam, he thinks he could raise into the kind of man he maybe wanted to be. And so that speaks something, I think, about what Steinbeck reads in the biblical story, right? He reads the story of Cain and Abel, and the characters themselves in the story later on read the story of Cain and Abel and argue about the interpretation of it. And he sees something kind of arbitrary about it, right? Because the story itself doesn't tell us. Like, we can theologize and we can have interpretation that we have now, this side of the New Testament, of like why it was that this happened. But the story itself doesn't tell us why God favored Abel rather than Cain. You know, maybe it's his faith. That makes sense. Like that makes sense in light of Hebrews and things. But like, it just God comes to Cain and is like, why are you downtrodden? Like, you know, like, and just basically says, almost says, get over it. I'm not trying to be sacrilegious with interpreting the way God is talking to Cain there, but we don't get a lot of explanation in the story. And so for Steinbeck, that seems arbitrary. He's like, so imagine you had a father figure that made that arbitrary choice to favor one son over the other. How would they feel about it? What would they do? I think that's, motivation.
That happens to people, though. I mean, that's like in real families. And he describes it very well. And then what sort of Charles becomes sort of possessed as this resentful person that just is never changes, I guess, for the rest of his life. He's just angry and resentful, which is, I guess, emblematic of Cain in some way. That's interesting.
And Charles also gets this mark on his forehead. So Adam goes off and joins the military. He goes out west and is part of the campaigns against natives in the West. And so Charles is back home taking care of the farm. And while he's extracting a rock, whacks himself in the forehead with a pry bar, and he gets a mark like Cain. So it's all very, like, so one of the criticisms that you hear of this book is that it's very heavy handed and it's very allegorical. It's just like one to one. I don't think it's entirely true. Like, Steinbeck is playing with the tropes, but I mean, there's stuff like that it's like, oh yeah, he gets a mark like Cain, like, there it is, right? It's right there. So.
Well, but it's also the biblical story. I mean, this is sort of what's compelling to me towards two things. One is Calvinism, which I don't know where you stand on the theological, but I'm generally Calvinist, but then also Chesterton, which he hated Calvinism. So it's very, very interesting. But the sort of paradoxical truths at the core of the Christian faith, it's like there's mysteries here that we don't understand. And when Paul is like, look, you know, some people will ask, why did you create some to be vessels for wrath and some to not, and to be vessels for glory, or whatever his terminology is? You know, who is it created to ask the creator, why did you create me this way? There's this mystery at the core of it. God hated Esau. He loved Jacob. And that's just this like theme throughout the whole Bible. And I think Steinbeck picks up on this very clearly in a way that I haven't never read in novels. Like that idea is just it's mysterious and strange. And then I think everybody maybe can relate to it, because I've seen it personally. I'll say,
Covenant College is actually, it's the denominational college of the PCA. So I am Reformed. I attend a PCA church. So, so very invested, I think, in Calvinism as a background. Yes. And one thing I try to kind of disabuse my students of, I don't teach in biblical and theological studies. And I always tell them, there are professors on my campus who can explain this stuff far better than I can. But I have taught this class called Cultural Heritage of the West, where we do read some works from Calvin. And there's a section where he's talking, he is basically praising pagan authors who have this like corrupted, fallen, yes, but still God-given gift of reason that they're using in really productive ways. And he talks about the human will. And one thing I like to disabuse them of is, like, to hear some people on the internet talk about Calvinism, for example, you would think that Calvin has no idea of a human will, that it's all robots and marionettes, right? But I think what Steinbeck gets at here is the real tension with, like, if you believe in any sort of providential God, you have to grapple with the fact that whatever comes to pass, as R.C. Sproul like to say, like when the Westminster Confession says that whatsoever comes to pass is ordained by God, all that means is he either allowed it or he made it happen. Those are the only options if you believe God knows the future.
Right.
And we've all got to grapple with that, whether you're Calvinist or not.
It seems Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So I think you're right. Like he gets those themes really, really well, which is just like you at least have to wrestle with the question of like, did I choose to be this way? Did God make me this way? Did my genetic inheritance make me this way? These are the questions kind of at the core of the book. And I don't think Steinbeck answers it clearly one way or another. I think that's why it's so appealing to so many people is anybody of any stripe can come to this and wrestle with it themselves. Yeah.
Right. It's a question that I think was bypassed, and why a lot of people over the past like 30 or 40 years, or maybe even longer, sort of weren't talking about East of Eden in this book. And I feel like there's been a little bit of a resurgence. You can't tell like where that's coming from all the time or what that means. But the idea, the sort of reason-based rationalism that sort of perpetuated through the West in the 1900s into the 21st century. And then you get into like postmodernism. And there's this sort of like something broke over the past like 10 years where they were like, yeah, there's absolutely nothing at the core of postmodernism. Everybody's playing this sort of Nietzschean power game and we're all trying to get power and it's absolutely horrible. And it turns out that guys like Steinbeck and Chesterton were kind of right. And Calvin, where it's like, yeah, you're fully morally responsible for your problems. And also there is a providential and sovereign reality here that like things are ordained in a particular way and we don't exactly know. And it's a mystery and you have to accept that mystery. I think one, is that a proper analysis? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were going to come away with one theme of the book, which is the theme that Mumford and Sons famously came away from the book with, is this Hebrew word timshel, that in Steinbeck's analysis, this is the word in the Cain and Abel story where God comes to Cain and says, sin's desire is for you and thou shalt rule over it, or however you translate that. Yeah. In the narrative, the characters interpret it as thou mayest, like it's the open possibility. In many ways, I think Steinbeck was very influenced by Christian humanism, this idea that like what makes humans great is our capacity for choice, that we get to in some way habituate ourselves, as Aristotle would say, that we could become more like one thing or more like another. And so I think Steinbeck kind of comes down on the idea that like, you got to believe that there's something about this that's inside your control, which again, like, I don't think like weirdly enough, as a Calvinist, I don't think is totally outside of the domain of what Calvin is saying, right? Like you're given human gifts that you can develop or cultivate or choose to spurn. And ultimately, as C.S. Lewis liked to put it in his theologizing about hell, is just like you're getting what you want at the end of the day. Right?
Yeah. I was just going to say that was that from George MacDonald, where there are those to whom they'll say to God, thy will be done in the end. And then there are those to whom God will say thy will be done and they'll go to hell. I mean, that's the way. And it's like theology. I would talk to some theologian. I can't remember who it was. He was like, yeah, I don't really agree with that, but I think it's true. It's this weird thing. Yeah. That is, and that's all very important to understanding this book. So there is this issue with the inheritance that Charles and Adam received from their father. What is that? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So Charles and Adam received this inheritance, and it's unclear whether or not there's some dispute between the brothers about whether their father kind of stole this money from somewhere, was kind of like skimming off the book somewhere, or if he earned it and just invested well. And one thing that's really interesting in that dialogue is, Charles, the brother who loved his father, is convinced that our father stole this money. Somebody's going to come looking for it. Like, we're going to be in trouble for it. And Adam just says, I just believe my father. I just have faith in him. I just believe that he couldn't have done that. And so the brother who doesn't love his father has the kind of simple faith. It's a weird bit of dialogue, but it benefits both of the brothers in the way that it gives Adam the money he needs to move out west and make something of himself. But yeah, so there's this question of like, where did their father get this money? But one way or another, they get this inheritance. But then there's also the question of their like genetic inheritance or their personality inheritance. Like, why is Charles the way that he is? Why is Adam the way that he is? They have different mothers. Maybe that's part of it. But is it chance? Is it luck? Is it choices? That's all in the background as well. So yeah, you have the actual physical, monetary inheritance that's tracking, but then the question in the background of like spiritual inheritance, almost like what makes us the way we are.
Right. What do they do with the money? What do both brothers choose to do with it?
Yeah. So Charles, like Cain, he's a man of the field, right? So he just buys up the properties around his father's farm. He improves the farm. He kind of expands it. He makes it, one of the richest farms and most respected farms in the area. I think there's a line that says like he was a man who was like respected but not admired, or respected but not loved, or something like that. Like the people around him, like they're like, wow, he's doing something, but like nobody likes him, right? Yeah. He's kind of this standoffish character. Adam decides he reads some advertisements about how great things are in the Eden of California, and he decides to jet out for California there. But before that happens, he marries this woman Kathy, who shows up at their door, and so. I don't know how many spoilers you want in this.
No, we got to talk about Kathy. I mean, this book has been out for like 70 years.
Yeah,
now.
I know.
So who is? Explain Kathy Ames.
Yeah, so Kathy shows up, and the way she's introduced, and as you said earlier, he has this really great discussion of just like human evil. And one thing that puts people off of this book is Kathy is, I think, properly described as in literature, it's sometimes described as a flat character. Right? You have the difference between flat and round characters. A round character is somebody who develops in the course of the story, learns a lesson, goes through the hero's journey or whatever. A flat character is somebody who's just there to serve a function of just like, this is the type of person they are, and they move the story along. Yes. She's just evil. She just is. Yeah. From the time she's little, she knows how to manipulate people. She learned, Steinbeck says, at a very young age, she learns that she can use sex to her advantage against young boys and older men. She just like, he doesn't explain why. And then in another later chapter, he's like, okay, maybe I could try to explain why. He's like, we all have this kind of like pond of grimy, icky, evil stuff in us. Mm-hmm. And some of us have a fence around it, and some of us dip our toe into it. And some people just dive straight in. And it's kind of unclear why one person is the way they are or not, but she's somebody who's just like fully immersed in whatever well of evil we all have within us.
And for that reason, she'll be the good character in the Netflix adaptation.
Well, we can talk about that. I revisited the trailer, and I'm less pessimistic than I was when I first saw it, but I'm still worried.
I'm so worried. I mean, it would be amazing if there was a good version of. I mean, there was the old one that a lot of people really like, the James Dean, I think, was in it or something like that. But
there's the old movie that James Dean was in, and then there's a 1981 miniseries that I've heard good things about. Oh, really? I actually meant to watch it before this conversation, but I didn't have a chance to.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. Yeah,
it's 1981. I think it came out, and I'm forgetting who plays Kathy, but it received high praise at the time. So I don't know how faithful it is, but yeah. So she shows up. Basically, the story that sets her up is she is this kind of like evil child who's manipulating people left and right. Her parents don't really realize it, or they're kind of trying not to realize it. Then she just decides she's not going to go back to school. Her father beats her once, and then she kills her parents. And she kills her parents, runs off, becomes a prostitute, and then gets in them with the wrong guy. And he almost beats her to death, kind of by accident.
Oh man!
And then she crawls her way to Adam and Charles's door. And so sort of providential circumstances there.
Yeah. Well, can I say that there's like the way that Steinbeck explains her evil and dives into it, and really like it almost feels uncomfortable at certain points, because it's it's like, how do you even know how to do this? It's sort of in the way that I think Lewis was so good at getting into the psychology of men and women. Steinbeck almost seems better, in my opinion, especially as it relates to Kathy Ames, and how it wasn't some generalized she's evil. It was evil particular to women in certain particular ways. And he could have done the same thing with men, I bet. And so she like kind of thinks about like burning the house, like all of the ways that she thinks about doing these things, and burning the house down, killing her parents, and then covering it all up, and then getting out of town, and then becoming a prostitute. Like it's like the worst part of the book to read, but probably one of the most necessary parts to read, which is one of these things that these authors in this time frame were able to do, I think, because they saw the wars. I don't know if anybody nowadays could write about evil as clearly, maybe, I don't know.
Well, and I think too, you mentioned like that maybe the difference between the way evil manifests for men and women. I think the contrast with Kathy and I'm forgetting the guy's name, but basically the guy who ran all of these prostitutes, who almost beats her to death. He's a very evil character in a very unique way, where he's like this prim and proper businessman. Everybody who knows him like respects him and looks up to him. He has a wife and kids, and like everybody thinks he's this respectable guy. When when in reality, he's running this empire of great evil. And then when pushed to it, becomes this like horrific, violent man, where hers is like, the sneaky planning kind of pernicious thing. So but he's giving us these contrasts. Yeah.
And he's like obsessed with Kathy. Isn't that he's like obsessed with her. He like can't stand when she leaves the house. Like what you got, like he's just becomes like insane. And later on, Kathy becomes like obsessed with controlling those types of men. It seems like she kind of
realizes that she has that power over people again, like from a young age, but especially in that relationship, she realizes what she can do to hold that power over them. And she seems to enjoy that particularly. And that's the thing that if anything drives her, it's that knowledge that she can have the power over these people, not to like skip too far ahead, but like when she eventually is running her own brothel out in California, one of the things that she seems to delight in is she has blackmail material on a lot of powerful people who come in and frequent it. And she even says like, one day I'm going to retire and it's not even like I'm going to threaten them with this. I'm just going to mail it to all their friends and family. And like, people are going to know what they were doing. And she just loves that. The fact that she can hold that power over them. Yeah. But yeah. So you see the two sides of that there, because she's like, I wouldn't have this power over them if they weren't evil like me, in a sense. It's almost like a self-justification for
exactly.
her.
That is one of the most interesting ways, like the way that she justifies her evil is fascinating. I mean, it's like, so it's like another level of evil too, but just to like, like if everybody else, she almost like, even in her conversations later on, which we're getting deep into it, but like the conversations later on with Adam, when he kind of goes to her brothel that she owns, and there's, she picks at these men in this like cynical, resentful, very bitter and controlling way that it's like you're just as evil as me. So like, let's not put each other on moral like there's no moral standard here. We're like, and I'm going to just exploit you basically. I don't know exactly if that makes any sense, but
no, absolutely. Well, and this is the disagreement that Adam has with her. And this is why eventually he's able to sort of get out of his, we'd call it depression now, but whatever, whatever funk or darkness he's in, he's able to get out of it because he realizes, she has a misconception of human beings. She sees herself and everyone else and doesn't realize that everyone else is actually more complicated than her. And this is why I fight with people about this. Like, some people will say she's not a flat character. Like, she's really rich and I don't think she is. I think Steinbeck is pretty obvious that like she just is evil, and she wants to feel better about being evil by believing that everyone else is actually like her. Exactly. And Adam sees her in that moment, the scene you're describing, and he's like, oh, you think everybody's like you, and they're not like you actually.
And it makes her into one of the more boring characters because of it. It's, I mean, not tech. I mean, everybody.
No, I know what you mean. It's like the banality of evil kind of thing. It's just like you're just like so straightforward. Everybody else is actually more complicated.
You're just bad. So she crawls up to Adam Trask's home. I mean, she's like literally crawling her way because she's just been beaten. Adam meets her. Explain that whole dynamic between
it's so Adam is already thinking about he wants to get married, he wants to move away, he's already thinking about this. He meets her, he begins caring for her. She's a kind of master manipulator from the start. She claims she's lost her memory, and he just like completely falls for her. He's completely smitten. And there's other people around, like Charles, like the doctor, who are like, something's weird here, like something, and they're trying to convince him like something's off, but Adam is just like kind of like starry-eyed about her. And so she sees him as her sort of path to safety in her moment of vulnerability, right? She's weak, she needs somebody to help her. He can kind of fill this role. But I mean, one of the sort of like most sickening, I think, parts of the book is like he proposes to her, she agrees to marry him, they get married. She says, well, I'm still injured, so we can't consummate the marriage. And then she goes and sleeps with his brother, Charles. And that is something. Worst. I mean, it's just like, you know, especially if you're a guy and you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, you're just like, oh my gosh, you know, like it just hurts. So it's like, but something that my friend Matt Young, he's a professor at Elon University, he brought up recently, which I hadn't even thought about, right, is around the time Steinbeck is writing in the 50s, there had been research studies coming out on the possibility, which we now know is a possibility, but very, very small possibility, that fraternal twins can actually sometimes be fathered by two different fathers. So when you have a extremely rare case when a woman has a kind of double ovulation and she has relations with multiple men in a small window, she can have children by two different fathers. fathers that are fraternal twins. And there's at least the hint that the children that come from the marriage of Kathy and Adam, one of them might be his brothers and one of them might be his. Maybe they're both his brothers, but like there's at least the possibility that this genetic component is straight down.
Yeah. He talks about like the skin complexion, like even very. Yeah, that's that scene though. Yeah, where I mean, she has sex with his, I mean, and it's only because it's just out of this like pure wickedness. It's basically
when she sees something in Charles, she looks at Charles and she says, "You're like me." She tells him that to him, and Charles is trying to get her to leave. He's scared of her because he sees himself in her, and she sees that he's like her, and so she manipulates him and sleeps with him. It's a wild interaction.
This is where the one-to-one thing, I think the Cain and Abel one-to-one thing falls apart maybe a little bit, because the idea, and I would be interested in hearing, like, is there a theological or philosophical, what's behind this? Adam falling for this. You're just like, dude, you're like there are other characters later on, I'm going to ask about this later, who can see it right away in Kathy. Like, she's not good, and why did you marry her, and what is wrong with you, basically? But Adam cannot see it, but he is sort of the Abel, he's the good character, and good, I guess, like he's the favored character. And like, is that just naivety? Like, what is that? Why does he get manipulated so easily?
I think I would pair that question with what I said earlier about the fact that Adam chooses to just believe his father, even though he doesn't love him, right? Even though he has all these negative experiences associated with him. He's like, no, he could never steal. I don't believe it. Right. So naivety might be the right way to describe it. Or I think Steinbeck is kind of interpreting biblical, moral innocence to be a kind of real innocence, like a childlike innocence, like Adam almost until the recovery after, way later when Kathy shoots him and all the stuff we will get to. But he just has this character of childlike innocence. Like, she'll say, I'm going to leave you when, like, by the time I have these kids, I'm going to leave you. And he just doesn't believe her. It doesn't penetrate into his head. He's just perfectly innocent in a way, and not in an actual moral sense, but in a childlike way. I think that's it. It's difficult to parse, and I think that's what makes Adam such an interesting character. Is he has seen real evil, so we get to see these scenes of when he's out west with all the campaigns against the natives, and obviously there's some scenes where it's like, oh yeah, they're killing Americans, we're going to fight back against them, but then there's scenes where he's just there like a slaughter, they're just killing women and children for no reason. He's seen real evil, and he comes back almost like seared to it, in a way. He's just like, no, that can't be.
I mean, and in some case, like the marriage to Kathy is like he's marrying his own brother, because they like her. I mean, that whole dynamic. It's not like he's marrying his own brother, but the same I know what personality, and the same evil, because when they have their whole thing where Kathy and Charles they have sex. The dynamic there and the explanation of both of the people is essentially the same. Like, they're both like the same type of evil, and so Adam like falling into this trap of that is just it's a fascinating thing, and it is something where it's like I think of some of the maybe one-to-one arguments that are made, like this is just what the Bible, like that's a little bit more complicated and strange, and but also it makes a lot of sense. The naive, the childlike. Would that be childlike faith, or is this more of a negative thing? This isn't necessarily a positive thing.
I kind of view it as more negative. And this is where, I think there are a couple places where Steinbeck has probably, we might think of it as like a fundamental misreading of the biblical narrative, right? There's a couple things that when they discuss the Cain and Abel story later in the book that they leave out that I think are important. But I think he's looking at that story and he's like, if God favors Abel, it's almost exclusively because of his like childlike naivete, like he's just something different than what Cain is, and that's why he loves him. Cain is the one with the potential for violence, and so God doesn't favor his offering, and so he favors Abel, and then that leads to the violence. And so I think that's sort of what he's reading into this story, or that's what's in the background for him. But then introducing this concept of human agency, he's saying, well, maybe it didn't have to be this way. Maybe you still have a choice, even in these circumstances. So they
move. So Kathy and Adam move west, and she's pregnant, or she gets pregnant, right? And they buy this land. It's beautiful land. It's great land. And this is where I think in the book you start to really see the contrast between the Hamiltons and between the Trasks and Adam's like wealthy. I mean, he's got money because of his father's inheritance. He bought a very nice plot of land, and he has kind of a vision and a goal for it, but he's married to like the worst person in the history of the world. And so that's that whole situation. And there's, so Samuel, this dynamic between Samuel, Kathy, and Adam, I think is fascinating. And I guess we'll just start with this. Like, Samuel's an interesting figure. You've talked about him a little bit. One, like, what or who does Samuel represent in the theological or philosophical sense? And explain who he is, like a little bit about him.
Sam Hamilton in real life is Steinbeck's grandfather on his mother's side. And so he was an Irish immigrant. He was in real life was a kind of person who had like grand visions for things. He was inventive in spirit and in real life as well, like in the book, somebody who he didn't totally financially ruin his family, but he lost a lot of money chasing patents. He had great ideas for new inventions that would make life much easier. He would get patents for them, spend a lot of money on lawyers to get those patents, and then somebody else would rip off his idea and actually make the money off of it. So those things seem to be true both of his actual grandfather and Sam Hamilton in the story. Sam Hamilton in the story, though, is kind of blown up into this figure that so my very first political theory paper in undergrad that sort of set me on the track I'm on now was we had just read Aristotle and then Augustine and Aquinas in this political theory class. And we were talking about this idea in both classical philosophy and Christian theology of the difference between an active and a contemplative life, right? So Aristotle says there are people who pursue active lives. Basically, like, I get up every day, I have things I have to do, practices I have to engage with, like a politician, right? Somebody who has to go out and lead the city. His concerns are for the affairs of state, right? That's an active life. But then what Aristotle seems to idealize, at least depending on which parts you're reading, is the contemplative life. I get to sit in my ivory tower and contemplate, and that's the best kind of human existence because it's the most rational. But then people
don't get along either. Those two,
exactly.
They get annoyed with each other. Yeah,
they do. Yes, and I get this a lot. Like anytime I talk about politics with people who are actually in politics, they don't like me because I'm just thinking about it. They're doing it. Right. But so Augustine comes along and he says, you know what's really true, what Aristotle is missing because he's a pagan ultimately, is that the best life for a human being is a combination of these two. It might look different depending on who you are. Like you might be more like an academic or a scholar or a monk or a priest or a pastor, or you might be somebody who's more in politics. But really, the best human life is one that includes, contemplation, devotion, prayer, all these things, and going out and ministering and doing all the things Jesus commanded us. The mercy side of the ministry of the gospel and the contemplation side of union with God. And so a mixed life of activity and contemplation is what he calls it. Right. I think Sam Hamilton in all of American literature is the character who exemplifies this, right? Yeah. He's somebody who's skillful with his hands. He's a blacksmith. He makes great inventions, but more than anyone in the Salinas Valley, he's the best bred person out there. He really gets this. Now, if you're looking for piety, it's not him, right? He is somebody who, like a lot of our founding fathers, got skeptical through his education and becomes more deistic at best, maybe kind of atheistic, who knows? But he doesn't share his wife's Presbyterian piety, but he's a learned man. And he kind of joins these things together. And so in the story, he serves as like the butt of some jokes in some ways, where like, here's a guy who can help anyone dig a well on their land and make their land prosperous, can't find water on his own land, can never raise a crop on his land. Here's a guy who raises amazing children, can help other people birth children, but just is never prosperous or successful in the way the people around him are. And so he's just such an interesting character to me. I have always said, I think he's my absolute favorite character in American literature that I'm familiar with. There's a lot of American literature I haven't read, but he's so fun.
I'm the same. I've read less than you, so my opinion matters less, but I love him. When I first, like when you meet him and you get to know him through the book, it's like, I want a portrait of him in my house. Like I want my kids to look up to him, and be like, this is who you should try to be. You try to be Samuel Hamilton. And he's an honorable person. And as the story goes on, he's like the moral force that keeps the thing together, him and Lee in a lot of ways. And there's fascinating conversations between the two. And so when Samuel Hamilton is it when he meets Kathy and Adam, or maybe like early on in their relationship, he picks up on the problems with Kathy. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the first time he's over at the Trask property, he's helping him, figure out where would be good to dig wells. Adam invites him to dinner and he meets Kathy. And like 2 or 3 times during their first meeting, he describes it in the Irishism of like a goose walked over his grave, right? He shudders and he gets goosebumps. And then late on the ride home, he's trying to place it and he's almost trying to talk himself out of thinking that this beautiful woman could be evil. Like he's almost like, no, it couldn't be her. Like there's nothing wrong with her. But then he realizes, no, something's up. Like shit, there's something. And then he realizes it's the eyes. He realizes that like every human being he's ever seen, the eyes are the window to the soul, we like to say. There's nothing going on back there. She has one way or another learned to just completely block off whatever is going on behind the eyes from whatever she's putting forward. And that's when he realizes like, this is I think he even says to Lee later, like, this is a demon. Like something's happening here that is like, I didn't think existed, but here it is.
Well, Samuel reminds me as I've been reading through the book, he seems to be one of two things, or both these things combined, or I don't know, maybe I'm just misreading it, but in some ways like the Holy Spirit, in some ways like just a spirit of discernment. He's like, this is, like you're saying, he's a guy he's very good, like, he's very smart, but he's good with his hands. He's good at building. He's good at helping people build their land up, except for his own. But but he seems to have this moral compass and this conscience, like he can pick things up very well and say the right thing. And it moves past intellectual thought. It moves past just like having good theories and theology and philosophy. It's not that alone. It's that combined with some other sort of spirit or discernment or something like that. And he embodies that. And well, do you agree with that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. And there's one bit of the story that I really love, which again, like I said, like he's not a pious man. He has doubts about his faith and his way. Like there's a scene where, speaking of his virtues, like he becomes righteously angry when he learns that Adam has not named his children, which we're getting ahead of ourselves again. But and so he's planning to go out and force him to name his children. And he's talking with his wife. His wife gives him the family Bible to go use to name the children. And she accuses him basically of like, turning over the scriptures like a raccoon with a wet stone, and like washing it off and looking at it from all angles. And he's like, well, I'm just trying to understand it. And she says, there's nothing to understand. You just read it. It just says it. Just say it's right there in black and white. And it's a really funny interaction. But like, that's sort of how he is. He's somebody who's like, I really want to chew on this and understand it. What's true, what's historical. You might think it was like approaching it with critical methods or whatever. But he also does seem to have this real like virtue and discernment. And I think this comes up really well in a letter that there's a back and forth between him and his son Joe. So Joe is the youngest son, and he's portrayed as this. I mean, Steinbeck uses, I think, the word effeminate at some point. Like he's kind of soft. He doesn't help with the farm. He's academic. He goes off to college. He starts writing poetry. Like all these stereotypes about the kind of soft academic-y types. I'm saying this about myself in a way. Right? But no, totally. But he's writing back to his father, and so we don't get to read Joe's letter. But Sam writes back and says, I'm kind of, I think he says literally, like, I'm pleased to learn that you've sort of become an atheist with your learning. I'd kind of be disappointed in you if you didn't. But he says basically, like, don't try to undermine your mother's faith, because her faith is a mountain and you have not even a shovel. And it's a moment where he's like, I'm a Christian. I wish Sam Hamilton was a Christian, but he's not. But he's saying, like, you don't even realize the difference between like your academic learning and what the piety your mother has in her relationship with God. Like, like, you'll only distress her and you'll lose compared to what she's got. It's just such a moment of wisdom. I think that I find it really compelling, even though obviously like I would. He's not a real person, but I wish he was a Christian,
The same dynamic, I think. Yeah, you get nervous talking about it, whatever, who cares? The same dynamic that I think you can see if you flip that, where it's like a lot of Christians over the past 10 years have been very critical of Jordan Peterson and his way of conceptualizing Christianity for good reason in a lot of ways. Like some of his stuff is, blatantly heretical, but like I read his We Who Wrestle with God, and there was some of the best theological thought I've ever read in there, and some of the
Some of the
worst. To be
worst.
honest.
Yeah.
And so, but it's like there's just these critiques or people trying to explain him, and it does feel like that scenario where it's sort of like you don't have a shovel, he's got a mountain, and you know, and I don't agree with it, but it's that sort of thing flipped where there are just I don't know what that dynamic is. I guess it's just like it's somebody who's built up a bunch of virtue and a bunch of belief and faith, and that's an admirable thing over a long period of time. And it's like you maybe think you've come to a conclusion, but you need to be careful before you try to start like picking at people with that or whatever it is, because you know, these people have been around for longer than you a little bit.
Maybe I should be careful about this too. I don't want to offend the audience, but like, I think that's a really good insight. And I think it's true, honestly, of a lot of like historical thinkers that Christians do like to use as punching bags. And sometimes they deserve it, right? If you're looking at like somebody like Rousseau, for example, wildly hypocritical person, writes a book about child rearing, gives up all his children for adoption, that kind of thing.
Foucault is similar. I mean, I think Foucault.
Well, maybe even worse. Depends on whose account you're reading. But I think there are people like Rousseau and Nietzsche and people like this that like probably good reasons to criticize them, but I often find I don't know that people are criticizing them for the right reason. So I think there's an aspect of humility there that you're right to hit on. Peterson,
I think you got to be careful to criticize Nietzsche. I mean, I think Nietzsche was wrong and has helped destroy things in the West, but like the guy seemed to be a lot smarter and a lot more like the platitudes that are thrown at him.
Yes.
It's like, come on, he's not an idiot. Like, let's not pretend like he's an idiot.
I taught a couple different classes this semester, not for like, oh, here's what you should believe, but for critical purposes. I taught Marx in a couple different classes this semester. And one thing I told my students a lot was like, if you think you've found like a kind of easy defeater for the stuff he's saying, he probably did think of it. He probably, you know, he's smarter than you're giving him credit for. Yeah. And so, I think you're right. Like Peterson often gets lumped in like both right and left, right? So you're saying some religious people might be like, oh, this guy's not a good Christian. He's a heretic or whatever. People on the left think of him as a kind of punching bag. Just a small anecdote. In my first year of grad school, we had him out at Wisconsin to speak. And so we had him out to dinner afterwards, the institute that I was working for. And so it was me, a couple grad students, a couple professors, and then like 4 or 5 undergrads. And his contract, I think he was supposed to have dinner with us until like 10. He stayed out with those undergrads until like 2 a.m, just answering all their questions. And he was like, he's the most sincere person I've ever encountered in my life.
Was this before he was famous and everything?
It was right when he was blowing up. So we had booked him before. I think he spoke. It was either right before 13 Rules for Life came out or right after. So it was like right before he really exploded. But I mean, he was like so generous with his time, so sincere in answering their questions. Like these guys were clearly passionate about getting his insight. And like, whether you agree with him or not, like there was something about that just felt very authentic to me that I still find admirable, even though, like you said, I have so many things I could criticize him on, but I just don't take a lot of the critics seriously.
So just to pile on top of what you just said, like I went to Jordan Peterson's house, met him in person. I went backstage, met him and Brett Weinstein in person, and same exact situation. I mean, and this is like 10 years after he was been famous. So, you know, sometimes you're like, somebody gets famous, maybe they're just turned into a jerk or something. He was incredibly nice and a wonderful person and listen to what I have to say. Like, why would you ever listen to what I have to say? Like, you should just be like, shut up, kid. But he listened, and he was just a nice person. So, and he was a thoughtful person. And you don't get that with everybody. And especially people who have more popularity or whatever you want to call that, fame. Sometimes they're just, and understandably, like they don't want to talk to you. They've got other things to do. So, all that to say, like, I think that dynamic is there. And I also think that there is a sort of disrespect, like in being so critical of people. It's a disrespect to their intellect in some capacity, because it's like everything in culture right now, especially with social media, is geared towards platitudes. It's just throw a platitude and pretend like you'd got this like snarky, like I've got him, we got him, you know, like, and it's it's like you didn't do 50 years of psychological study, and you didn't study the Soviets for 40 years. Like I don't know. Maybe you're right. You got the platitude right, but I still don't like you. That's sort of my attitude.
I think it's a good way of summarizing it.
So let's move. We talked about, so Samuel's able to pick up on this dynamic. Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned something, and it's maybe we'll talk about it after this. So Samuel has a servant or a guy who kind of works under him, Lee.
He works for Adam. Yeah. So Adam hires him to work on his property. Yeah.
So of course it's Adam. Yeah. Who is, I guess we should probably talk about how the twins are born before all this, correct?
Yeah. So Kathy comes, she's pregnant, and she's having children, and Sam has birthed a lot of children in the area. And so he comes out to help with this, and his interactions with Kathy in the birthing room are sort of where he realizes the extent, I think, of her, whatever she's got going on, psychopathy or whatever we want to call it. Where he realizes, like, even in the midst of her labor, like, she's not screaming like most women he's encountered. She's just sort of like bearing down and just like she's suffering through it, and she just wants it to be done. And so something weird is going on. And then while he's cooling her forehead with the rag, and he sees a scar that she has from her beating that matches Charles's scar, and importantly, and he touches it and she bites him. And so there's something very something very different, I think, from the biblical story, but she's a kind of serpent-like figure here, I guess. But he realizes something weird's going on. He helps birth the twins. He does that, and she just says, like, take them away. I don't want anything to do with them. And then,
because she had tried to abort them prior.
Yes.
We forgot to even mention.
Yeah, we missed this.
So explain. Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So they're in Salinas. She is complaining of pains or something. They call the doctor. The doctor kind of kicks Adam out, and he realizes that she's tried to self-abort with a knitting needle. And he's like, basically, like, you failed, and you could have killed yourself with sepsis or something. Like, if anything happens to these kids, now I know, and I'll make sure you get punished for it, because abortion was still illegal in the 50s. Or, well, this is not the 50s. This is early 1900s. Sorry, the book's published in the 50s. But the doctor
in California
says,
too. Who would have thought?
Yeah, exactly. Even in California. So the doctor says, basically, like, I'm going to be watching you. And so this is another moment where she's feels vulnerable. So there are all these interesting story beats. The points where Kathy feels vulnerable are revelatory, I think, in the story. So the first time that we see is when her father beats her, then she kills her parents. The next time is when the man she's manipulating that almost beats her to death gets her drunk, and she sort of reveals her soul to him. And then the next time is when she's almost beaten to death. And then the next time is in that moment with the doctor where she's tried to self-abort, and he knows what's happened. He's like, I have no problem with turning you into the sheriff, basically. And she realizes she's got to chill for a minute, and then she gets drunk again later. Like, there are all these moments where her guard is down, and those are really key story moments.
Right. Well, they're also key because it shows sort of a flaw in pure evil. I mean, it's sort of the thing with Hitler too. All these sorts of terribly evil people. It's like you can't hold up the facade. It's such a facade. It's such a lie. Everything in your life is predicated on lies, and that means that every waking second, you've got to be on your game, and nobody has the capacity to do that. And I think Steinbeck in those scenarios really shows that it's a terrible thing to read about her, but it's a comforting thing to know that there are flaws in evil. To be purely evil is very difficult. It's like a job. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. So that sort of is in the background of all of this, and eventually we do learn actually that the doctor tells Sam about the knitting needle incident. Like, he finds out one way or another. I don't think we actually see the doctor tell him, but he tells Kathy later that he knows about it, or the sheriff tells her that he knows it. Like people learn basically that this happened through word of mouth. So she gives birth to the twins. She wants nothing to do with them. Adam, again, is still in his fog of oh, I'm in love with her, whatever. And she's like, I'm leaving now that I'm not pregnant anymore and I'm not vulnerable anymore. I'm leaving. He's like, no, you're not. And she says, yeah, I am. And then she ends up shooting him
Yeah.
and running away, which is just like, I mean, for Adam, of course, is devastating. And
Yeah.
the thing the thing I think that makes it so poignant too is like Adam recounts it as like realizing she could have killed him and she chose not to because she
Right.
was so indifferent to him. Like she didn't hate him. She didn't have nasty feelings towards him. He was just in her way. And so she's like, I don't even have to kill you. I just kind of want you to know that like I can do this to you. It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a real brutal part of the story too. It's like Adam just keeps getting betrayed, like just in the worst ways over and over again. And so, she shoots him and he's like laying there. He's got these 2 crying babies. He doesn't know anything about being, a father. Like he doesn't even know. You're almost like, this is a bad, like this is like the worst situation you could ever want to be in. Yeah. And so then Lee is the house servant, and he's Chinese, I think. And he's there. And so explain, who is Lee? Who does he represent? What does he represent? And what's that? Who is Lee? Yeah.
Yeah, Lee is such a fascinating character because he's the site of, I actually saw people on Twitter recently talking about how, like, reading East of Eden, they learned slurs they didn't know existed. Lee is the site of like so much racism in the book, where it's like, so he's a Chinese immigrant in California, the son of railroad workers, and at a time when, if you're Chinese in California, you are either actively a railroad worker or some sort of house servant or something. And so, bottom rung of society in a lot of ways. And so he puts on this, pidgin Chinese stereotype accent that we associate with like old racist tropes. But he's doing it intentionally because if I talk normal, people don't listen to me, which is just a great bit of insight. But he's this kind of like wise, sage-like figure. And I don't know how to map him onto sort of the biblical story, but I've heard him described as like, this is heretical if you, depending on which interpretation of this you adopt, but I've heard him described as kind of a Melchizedek figure. Like he's somebody who kind of comes from outside, has this wisdom and insight, seems to overlap with the people who are there, the wise people who are there in a way. And I wouldn't push that too hard. I don't know.
But I was going to ask you about the fact that that's actually like, one of my questions I had written down was like, he's got all this Eastern philosophy, like this Eastern stuff that he's bringing to the table, and he's like forming Adam. He's forming, like, everybody around him is sort of influenced by this Eastern thing. And you're like, what is that? Like, where does that even come from? Because this is sort of an American story built on biblical presuppositions. So where is that? So that's actually fascinating, the Melchizedek.
Yeah, I think it's at least Steinbeck saying, like, I think even in the biblical narrative, one thing I like to point out to students too, like in that same class I was describing, when we read Acts, for example, what you find in the story of Pentecost is, Peter is preaching his sermon not just to pious Jews, but to all sorts of God-fearers from all sorts of nations. So like there's this idea that like there are people here who are like coming to the source to seek out this wisdom because they're drawn to it, and so there's some overlap there that I think is interesting. But so Lee is kind of a key conversation partner with Sam and with Adam. He also has kind of realized what Kathy is. He takes care of the boys, but then ends up being the kind of the philosophical hook of the central part of the novel about the story of Cain and Abel. And so I don't know how far you want to jump ahead, but we get the naming scene, but then we get this conversation with Sam and Lee and Adam where
can you talk about the naming? I know, like, we'll get to that because I want to talk about the central point of it. But the naming scene is fascinating to me because that's where Samuel gets violent, correct? And
yes.
So there's something here because I'm reading through this in the same time I'm reading Space Trilogy or Ransom Trilogy, Lewis, and the same sort of theme pops up both with Lewis and Steinbeck, in which in Perelandra.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that.
No, I know. It's like the realization that the only answer to the problems that both of these characters face, one is Ransom, one is Samuel, is physical violence.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, Lewis is just blatantly Christian. So what does that mean? And people, you know, you get a lot of the Christianity is not a violent religion. I don't know. These guys seem to think it kind of was a little bit. And Steinbeck is most morally virtuous character solves one of the most important problems through physical violence. I don't know what that is, but can you explain that scene?
Yeah, it's great. So like I mentioned earlier, right? So Sam goes back home. So he meets Lee in town, and Lee tells him the children have not been named yet, and he experiences a righteous anger, and he goes home and he's like, I've got to tell my wife that I'm going to go out there and make sure they're named, because after the incident with Kathy, after everything that happened, Liza has basically warned him to stay away from the Trask homestead. Like she's basically said, like, you don't need anything to do with them, it's not wise. And so he's like, I got to convince her, and their relationship is just a wonderful part of the story. So he goes and he's like, he explains and he tells her that they're not named yet, and he expects her to push back.
Right.
And she basically was like, well, what are you going to do then? And he thinks she's saying, like, don't do it. But she's trying to goad him into manliness, basically. Right. Like, she knows, like, you're going to chicken out if I don't poke and prod you. Like, you need to go out there and do something about it. What are you going to do if he says no to naming his children? What are you going to do?
Old.
And Sam
like,
says,
they're a couple, like, how old? Like, the kids are... How old are they at this point?
I mean, by this point, I don't actually know. I'd have to look at the dates, but by this point, Sam has to be in his 70s. Like, he's old. And he's like,
and the kids are like, they should
adults,
be named. Like the
kids. Yeah, no, the kids are almost 2. I think. Yeah, I think they're 2 at least.
Yeah, they're like they need names.
I think I think it's a year. I think Lee says it's been like a year and 3 months or something since he was shot. So it's so they're about a year and a half.
Yeah,
And so she says, what are you going to do if he says no? And he says, I'll show on the back of my hand. And she says, you won't. Like she literally is like goading him into it. I know. It's amazing.
And she's like the fundamentalist, like the fundamental Baptist, which is just all these dynamics that I think he picked up on exactly right. I don't know how he picked up on that, but like one of the other things too that I think is cool is that their horse's name is Doxology.
Doxology, yes.
And then there's a full explanation as to like why he named him Doxology that I think is one of the best parts of the story as well. But anyways, so show the scene, I guess. Tell us what the scene is. He's got to go and violently put Adam in his place, I suppose.
Yeah, so he takes Liza's family Bible, goes out to the Trask place, and Adam's like, why are you here? And it's one of the more interesting parts of the book because Sam speaks poetically quite often, and this exchange between them, Sam is almost speaking like King James English to this I don't know, blithering man in front of him, this guy who's been wallowing in depression.
Right.
And he's speaking very poetically. And at one point, Adam is like, you're acting crazy. Lee, go get the gun. And Sam says to him, you have 2 weapons and they unnamed, or something like this. Like basically like the resources you have available to you that God has given you are your sons. The children of your youth that you could be equipping, and you haven't even named them. You haven't identified them. You haven't differentiated them. He uses all this very poetic language, and Adam is just telling him to leave. And so Sam chokes him and then eventually just like hits him. And then this is my favorite part. He hits him, he knocks him down, and then Sam says, get up, and Adam gets up and he hits him again and knocks him down again. And so he just does it twice. And then after all this, Adam is finally like, okay, man, I give up. And he's like, he says something, and then Sam's like, did I do a good enough job? I promised my wife I hit you. Like he's almost like kind of bashful about it.
Yeah.
But then then they sit down over the Bible.
Real quick, go ahead. Yeah. He's Sam in his head is like, he's real. This isn't something that he wants to do. So I think that's like an important thing. Him and Ransom too. They both have they deliberate over this for a period of time. Both these characters in these 2 different books, they deliberate over like Ransom's got to kill the devil physically, basically. So like that sucks. Like you got to do that. And the devil is not easy to kill. And Samuel's got to like, I guess, kill the devil out of somebody in some way. So it's sort of like they're deliberating, and the way that they're deliberating is like they're not joyously going after violence, which I think is important just because there's a lot of maybe it aligns with Jesus's in the temple sort of like, you don't want to wipe the temple out, but sometimes you got to, because it's just so corrupted and messed up. And so I just thought that the deliberation and the way in which Samuel is thinking through this whole action was really good. Like, it was just really, because he was like, I don't know, and then he does it, and when he does it, he goes all in on it 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a really important point of this, is like, this is not in his nature. Like, his wife has to goad him because she knows if she doesn't, he won't, but he thinks it's important enough that he's going to overcome that part of his nature, and
Right.
it's something he's willing to do, not like as a sacrifice of his principles, but like, though I wouldn't do this on a normal day, it's so important that this happens. Yeah.
It's a fulfillment of his principles. I mean, it's like you have no other point, you have no other option to do. Yeah. So what happens after Adam gets destroyed a little bit, physically destroyed?
So then they sit down over the Bible and they start talking about names, and they end up talking about the Cain and Abel story first. And Sam mentions Cain as a name, and Adam is like, I'm not going to, he's like, well, you know, Adam is the name of the first man, his son Cain, you could name one of them Cain. He's like, I'm not going to do that. That seems like almost a curse on him, right? That he's going to follow in that legacy. But he's like, you know, maybe there's something else there. And then they mention Caleb and Joshua, and he mentioned Sam says, you know, Joshua was trying to make sure I get this straight of how Sam says it in the story. I think he says, you know, Joshua was a general, like he's a martial man, but Caleb was a captain. He was a leader in a way that wasn't as directly martial. And so Adam latches onto that. He's like, yeah, that I like that. And he says Caleb, and one of the twins cries or moves or something, and so attaches it to him. And then they go through some other early biblical names, and they mention Aaron, and the younger of the two twins cries out, and so they name him that. And so they obviously get the C and the A repetition there, and this kind of intentional, almost like a Marvel movie where somebody says something and you're like, oh, is that? And then they move on from it with the Cain, you know, almost named Cain. No, it's
because Samuel didn't
Caleb
bring
instead.
his Bible. He brought his Bible.
Yeah, he brought Liza's family Bible. Yep. Yeah, so there's nothing better for names than the Bible.
Right. Yeah. They're just like, well, and it. See, that's where I think there's some genius in Steinbeck, where it's like, it's not entirely unrealistic, where you're like, I don't know what to name the kid. Let's just go look in the Bible. I mean, everybody has done that for all of you.
Oh, absolutely.
History, so
I think my mom told me that I was almost named Aaron because they did the same thing. They're just like flipping through the Bible. They're like, oh, Aaron's good. And then they just kept going, you know?
No, I mean, that's how it works. And so that, I mean, that seemed to me to be like one of the central points in the story, and one of the more interesting points, because up until that point, Samuel Hamilton is incredibly discerning. He's incredibly intelligent. He's all of these things, but I don't know if he would have been a completed character if he didn't have the capacity for violence. And this is where I think, you know, one of the things, just to talk about Jordan Peterson again, but he does talk about that. Like, Jordan Peterson talks about the especially the masculine capacity for violence, and the fact that, like, your goal is to understand your capacity for this violence, to tame it, and to be able to use it if necessary, not to completely eradicate it. And it's this very complicated relationship that men have with violence. And you see some of that in, like, the Beauty and the Beast and that story. And so like Samuel Hamilton being able to use it at the right time, and then it actually achieves what, because the outcome could have been Adam could have, like, tried to kill him or something. You just don't know in those situations, because Adam is, like, down on his luck. He's, like, totally depressed. He's just not functioning at all. And so he was taking a big risk, and you got that sense while reading the book, or at least I did. It's like, this is a risk, you know, it could totally backfire on him and be very bad, but he took it at the right time. And I think that all is sort of the fulfillment of the character that Steinbeck seemed to be building in Samuel Hamilton, which is just really fascinating.
I think that's a good insight. And before that in the story too, you know, the characters that we see that are violent are usually some of the worst people, like the whore master at the early on who tries to kill Kathy. But then also you see an example of people like Adam who are not morally developed people, who are still just sort of floundering in the world. And he goes out on campaign, and even in circumstances that it might have really required him to be violent, it says he intentionally, like, overshoots the heads of the Indians that they're fighting. He's unwilling to kill them. You know, I think Steinbeck is sympathetic to that. He's like, he feels the injustice of the whole campaign. But there are times where it's like, if I don't kill that guy, he might kill the guy next to me, and he still is, like, fundamentally kind of cowardly in a way. That is, if it's not condemned, it's at least ambiguous in the story. Like, here we see, like, an expression of violence that I think is categorically virtuous. Yeah. In the story context. Yeah.
Right, which is at the core, another sort of paradoxical mystery at the core of Christianity, that there's a streak of violence there, and it's a strange thing. But so what you were getting to earlier was that there's this conversation between Lee, Samuel, and was Adam is there during that conversation, correct? And it's sort of this is like the center of the book. It's about the Hebrew word timshel, and an interpretation of, I believe, Genesis. Is it Genesis? I don't remember what chapter it is. Do you remember?
Now I'm forgetting too. Somewhere on the spot. Don't make me do this. I don't teach biblical and theological studies. Okay, I'm not.
It's somewhere in the book of Genesis, and so the Hebrew word timshel, and there's this. This is like one of the most fascinating parts of the book. As a Calvinist, who you get frustrated with some of the Arminian arguments for free will and the obsession in the American culture with free will, you can, I don't know, I gained more of an appreciation for some of that American cultural free will on the basis of this conversation. A lot of it nowadays is sort of just like libertarian, I just want to do whatever I want sort of thing. But like, this is more meaningful. So explain this conversation and the backstory of this conversation, because this goes back to one of the first conversations in the book, I think, between these characters, correct? Okay. So,
I think it may happen in the naming conversation or earlier on, maybe even, but they have this conversation about the Cain and Abel story where it's like, oh yeah, I always found that kind of weird. One, we don't really know why God favored one over the other. And two, this statement that God makes, like, sin will be at the door and thou shalt rule over it. It's like, that sounds kind of deterministic. Is that really what he meant? Because I mean, apparently he didn't rule over it. So there's this question raised, my wife is also listening to the audiobook right now. Nice. As I was telling her, I was doing a couple different podcasts on this recently because I tweeted about it, and so people noticed. But she was kind of annoyed actually with the way Steinbeck described it. But one of the formulations that he puts forward is a kind of command, like this is something you have to do. Another one is put forward as like a kind of deterministic statement of this is what you will do. And what the characters land on, well, let me back up. So Lee says, oh yeah, after that conversation earlier, whenever that happened in the book, I became curious about this word. And I knew based on my study of ancient Chinese texts, how hard it is to interpret ancient texts. So I took this to the elders in my family, the Lee family, and I asked them about it. And they said, well, we don't know. So they went to some rabbis, and all these old Chinese dudes start learning Hebrew and they learn Hebrew for multiple years, and they become so good at Hebrew that he says they outpace the rabbis. But they come back and they say the word should more properly be interpreted "thou mayest" in the kind of King James vocabulary, which is it's a permission, it's an open door, it's a choice. And that's why I say, like, I think Steinbeck was really influenced by Christian humanists. So one of the most famous texts in this tradition is Giovanni Pico della Mirandola's Oration on the Dignity of Man. And this is a guy who is writing in the Renaissance. He's trying to be a good Christian. This is before Luther, he presents a series of theses for debate, which end up being ruled heretical. And it's actually the first printed book that's ever banned by the Catholic Church is his theses for debate. But he's influenced by some weird pagan mysticism, some weird Jewish mysticism, some weird, ancient philosophy, but also Christianity. And in this book, he uses this language of, we look in the Old Testament, we see Jacob's ladder to heaven, and he describes human choice as this ladder to the stars. And Steinbeck, I think, is cribbing that language, obviously either from scripture or from Pico in that sense. And so he says, this choice is what makes man great. That's the part that it's quoted in the Mumford and Son song.
Go ahead. No, I was just
sorry.
No, yeah, I know we're on the internet and there's always that weird lag. But this is one of the interesting aspects of the question of free will to me, that I think, like, the people get so bent out of shape about this question. Calvinism, Arminianism, even in the Christian church, like, people just like, they get like, this is one of the core questions, I suppose, in Protestantism, especially, like, what are you? Free will, predestination, what is it? And I don't know. I mean, I think you can appreciate, or at least I appreciate, these sorts of writings, like what Steinbeck is doing here and discussing the choice of the person. I guess the way I think about it is sort of the ontological truth and the phenomenological truth phenomenologically, we have all of these choices and you've got to pick the right thing.
Yep.
Ontologically, like that's not really up to you and you shouldn't worry about it too much,
Yeah.
but just try to pick what to do right. And it seems like people just get so bent out of shape about this stuff. Yeah, I don't know. That's just one way to think through it. But so that they come away. So he comes away with the interpretation thou mayest.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he said like that's the right interpretation.
Yeah.
Or that's the way he sees it. And so I think I don't know if I should ask this now. I'll ask it now. We'll see where it goes. Or at the end, I was going to ask. I think this is. I'll wait till the end. To ask it because it's a strictly American question. Yeah. Okay. You have anything else on that, Tim Shell? Like what that all represents and means? I mean, it's.
Yeah. Well, so the question that they're really wrestling with in that is both, it's the Cain and Abel story. Why is Cain the way he is versus Abel? It's also the real lived story because they all have now experienced Kathy to various degrees. And it's a question of why is somebody like that the way that she is? Yeah. And is it just because, like, was she born that way or did she make choices along the way? And the answer I think Steinbeck really gives is both, right? I mentioned earlier, I think he does present Kathy as a flat character where like she just from birth onward, for whatever reason, is just fully swimming in that pond of evil we all have inside of us. But along the way, she's clearly made choices that have made her more like that, and she could have not made those choices. Yeah. And so he's clearly implying by giving us that word and that concept that she could have, she could have not slept with Charles. She could have not become a prostitute. She could have not shot Adam. Like all these things are things she could have not done. Whatever was going on inside her that made her do that or made her want to do that, she still could have not done it. And so I think that's an important part of it, which is like, in a way, he is kind of embracing determinism where we have this just evil character.
Right.
In a way, he's saying, yeah, but even those evil people, they still could have not in some sense. I think you're right. The phenomenological versus the ontological, I think is a good distinction, right? Like I said earlier, I think anybody who believes there is some sort of God who knows the future knows like there's some ordering of events that's taking place, but we experience choice and responsibility. And I think that's clear in scripture as well.
So the dynamic here though of Tim Shell, the idea that thou mayest, I think it like you start to see how it drives a story forward, especially from this point on for Adam in particular. Tells his kids that their mother died. It comes out that's not true. She actually lives relatively close by in a town where she runs her own brothel, and she's got all these politicians and important people that go to this brothel, and she has all this blackmail on everybody, and she's still just a terrible person. And Lee is the one who's like, you got to tell the kids that their mother's still alive, and so Adam is then forced to confront this again. Kathy, who he hasn't confronted since she shot him, I think. And so again, this is like a choice because he could have chose to lie to his kids again. He could have chose to not go confront her, but he does. Can you explain like that dynamic between him and Kathy? He's like a different man now, sort of.
Yeah. I mean, he goes the first time he confronts her, he gets drunk with her, so every time she gets drunk in the story, she exposes who she is, and that's the first time he really sees her for who she is, and so he kind of stumbles out of there, goes to a bar, and that's like the kind of breaking point. Then he does have to go back at a different time when he's sober and kind of confront her again and just and make clear to her that this break is final, that he's sort of like whatever attached him to her before he's kind of done with. It's a really interesting pair of scenes where in the first one she feels very in control. She thinks she can still manipulate him. That's why they drink together. In the second one, she's almost desperate to like get him to stay, to mess with him, and he's just done with it. And it's very, and because he comes back and she's like, "What are you gonna turn me into the sheriff?" Like they have this. What if I told you the sheriff has an order out that if I ever use your name again, they'll arrest me and haul me off from here? It's like, I don't care. I'm done. I'm done with it. And so that's, I think, a really interesting pair of confrontations where it feels very human to me as well. Like anything that you're going through that you're real messed up about, sometimes you got a messy confrontation with it, and then sometimes you've got the clarity that comes with it later. So, and
you can see she's almost like seething at the mouth. Like she can't, like her fists are clenched. She cannot, she's lost control
over
him
for like the first time ever almost.
Which is for like the first time ever in both of their lives, because it seems like every man that she's involved with, she has been able to control, but she's got this very special situation with Adam where she has children with him, and they were married for, you know, a little while, or I mean, I guess they're technically still married at this point, which is where, so he gets this letter, or he sends a letter to his brother too.
Yes.
So you explain that as well, because he hasn't talked to his brother in years. His brother's still living out on the East Coast, and he decides at some point, like, I'm going to write a letter to him and just see how he's doing. Basically, what happens there?
Yeah. So after that confrontation with Kathy, he feels free in a way he hasn't before, and a human again in a way he hasn't before. He reaches out to his brother, and what leads to that second confrontation with Kathy is this letter where he learns his brother's already died. And so that's one of the things that makes this, you know, such a kind of quintessential 20th century American novel, is so many things you wish would happen just don't. You don't get happy resolutions to a lot of the storylines. A lot of people, like, there's a lot of nasty stuff that happens, and it's just not a happy ending in many ways. And so his brother dies. They never reconcile, but he learns that his brother willed his the majority, or whatever is left of his estate, to him and his wife if she's still living, so she's half owner of it. And so he has this choice now. He talks to Lee about it. He's like, well, she's shot me and ran away and is pretending to not be my wife, so I could pretend she's dead and just take all the money. And he makes the what he considers to be the legally and morally right decision to tell her about it and say, this is your money and you get it free and clear. And that's where why she raises this, is like, well, you know, I to claim it, I need to use your name. And if I use your name, the sheriff has threatened to haul me off. And he's like, I'm not going to turn you in, basically. Like it's yours free and clear. Like, I'm not holding this over your head. I'm not going to withhold it from you. He just makes the right decision there. And that just infuriates her. She doesn't know what to do with that. She has no concept of a man who isn't evil in the way that the men who come to her brothel are. So
this is another strictly Christian idea too, that seems to be clearly portrayed, that like the best way to defeat evil is just to do the right thing. It's like pretty plainly like, we'll just do the right thing, because people can't handle that, because there is this sense in which you can, I mean, I think we live in a society of blackmail, right? Like everything is blackmail, or it's just digging up crap from the past or something like that, on people just holding things over their heads. And regardless of what you think about the Epstein stuff and all that, it's like there's weird crap happening in the world, and there's just bad stuff. And people, I think a lot of people are operating out of sort of that fear of this blackmail, even regular people. And I think not like politicians and famous people, but actually just regular people are as well. And so the only way to escape that is to just try your best to do the right thing, and to just sort of confront the problem and be clear about it, and to tell the truth to the best of your ability. And I think it's a very plain thing, but that's like the most Christian thing. It's don't engage with the lie. Don't engage with the evil. Just tell the truth. And he portrays it very well. It's like, once he starts doing that with Kathy, once he has a revelation of who she actually is, she's like terrible, and he was like under a spell or something for some reason in his naivety. Once he realizes that, he then confronts it, and then he basically just loses its power over him. And it's kind of like a mundane thing, but you're like, that's kind of what you have to do to deal with evil, whether it's in yourself or somebody else. So okay, man, there's a lot here. So the idea, the Tim Shell idea, this is what I was going to ask earlier, but I'm just going to ask now. But the idea that it is thou mayest, and it's that all just seems incredibly American. Like this is an American story, and I don't exactly know why it seems uniquely American. And you know, there's obviously like the Salinas Valley and the American sort of, especially in California, people moving to a different land to build something new, and they're entrepreneurial and they've got visions, and you know, that all makes sense. But it's also rooted in biblical concepts, and it has a lot of that Western tradition in there. He throws a little bit of the Eastern stuff in there with Lee, but the story at its core, for some odd reason, it's distinct from English stories and from English writers. It's American, and it feels American, and it feels like it's almost central to the American imagination in some odd and strange way. And Tim Shell, the idea of Tim Shell seems to be at the center of that. I don't exactly know why, but what is why I guess why is this so American? Like, what is that about that concept that seems so American?
I think, I don't know, actually, this is something I should confirm. I don't know if Steinbeck was familiar with Tocqueville, but they're both hitting on a similar part of the American spirit. So one thing that Tocqueville said about Americans, or, you know, the kind of democratic man that existed in America, was that he was kind of restless in his soul. And one of the ways that Tocqueville described that is the Democrat of soul is somebody who will put a roof on his house today and strike out west for new territory tomorrow. Right? It's like he doesn't. His vision is always for the next thing in a way that I think is captured in this. Not a hobbit at all. No, absolutely not. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why the best part of America for Tocqueville was like the New England township, like the kind of person who's like, yeah, I've got roots. I've been, you know, my ancestors were Puritans. We've been here for a couple hundred years at this point, and, you know, we're stuck in the soil. That Tocqueville loved that, but he was kind of mystified by the rest of America, where it's like anybody at any time might just be like, yeah, I planted a garden, but like, I'll sell the property and go west tomorrow because there's good land out there. And we see that captured here. I think one of the things that's cool about this story that makes it such a potential, you know, like we talk about, there's the classic great books, capital G, capital B. One of the things that makes this a candidate for like the great American novel or a great book is that it's a quintessential human experience, because you see all types of people, right? You get the businessman, and you get the stoic, and you get the faithful person, and you get the Eastern servant, and you get the evil person. Like all types of different characters get folded into this. It is very much like a kind of epic tale in that way. But in a way that is, as you said, I think quintessentially American. You are capturing a slice of the American spirit, not just then, but like, you know, late 1800s, early 1900s, in ways that we're still feeling today. I think one of the best characters for this is Tom Hamilton, right? Who becomes a Ford dealer. He becomes one of these people who's pushing cars on people who's like, why would I need a car? There aren't even roads yet. Actually, that's another fun thing is like the American spirit of innovation. One thing Tocqueville writes in his letters, he goes out to Wisconsin and he says, there are roads before there are settlements. People are charting courses through the woods before there's anything to go to, because they're so optimistic that there's going to be something to go to. The same thing is almost happening with the cars, where it's like, we don't even have roads for the cars yet, but you're going to get a car because someday everybody's going to want one of these.
That is actually like that. I haven't read. Is that What I Saw in America, or
Democracy in America?
Democracy in America. Chesterton wrote What I Saw in America, but the Democracy, I have that. It's a fat book, and I gotta find time to read.
It's a commitment, but once you start it, you're like, oh, this is good.
Well, it's got one of the best. I think maybe it doesn't have one of the best quotes. I've seen this quote: "America is good, great because America is good." Is that from there? And it's like,
it is.
You know, I search for all the greatness of America, and it's like, it's because they're like good, you know, people, like moral, and that's wonderful. And it doesn't really portray America today, unfortunately. But the idea that I've never even thought through it like that there's this restless attitude in the American spirit. And I mean, Wisconsin. So building roads before you know where they go is like incredibly ambitious. And it's very, you can't think of another civilization in human history that would do that. That's just stupid. It kind of sounds stupid, but
it does. It really does. And for Tocqueville, it's mystifying, because like he actually, one of the things that's curious about his experience with America is as an aristocrat himself, because Alexis de Tocqueville, he's from Tocqueville in Normandy. He's an aristocratic family. He really actually envies the Native Americans more than the American settlers. He sees them as kind of aristocrats, where like a democratic person, he says like, well, I own this plot of land and I put a fence around it and I could sell you the deed to it. He says the natives, the Americans, came and said, hey, we want to buy your land and you can go live over there. And they said, can we move the bones of our ancestors? Basically, like we're deep in this soil. We belong here. It's not like about fences. But he goes out to Wisconsin and he has this short text called Fortnight in the Wilderness. He spends 2 weeks out in the wilderness with the natives, and he says, you know, these natives, they were happy. They had everything they could ever want. They had all the game they wanted. They were you know, happy and everything. The only thing they envied of me was my gun. It's like they liked my nifty technology that made it easier to hunt, but everything else they had. It's a great. I think it's a good interpretive guide, actually, in some ways, to Steinbeck and some other.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and it's fascinating because the idea that the American is rushed. I haven't put these pieces together yet, but I was reading a forum recently, and somebody was like, it was like a recommendations. People were like, what should we what book should we read? Somebody was like, should I read East of Eden? Everybody's saying to read it. It's kind of having a resurgence now. And then somebody was like, yeah, why is everybody saying that? And I think to what you're saying right now, like I think Americans are trying to figure out what are we? Because we've lost everything. I mean, everything has been lost in the last 60 years. You go back further, and who knows when it started and how and when things get worse or better. But we've lost like everything that we once were. It almost seems like the idea of like insuring everything. I just like insurance itself. Like that just isn't American. I'm not saying we should have insurance, but like that's not American. Like people being obsessed with insurance and healthcare and like all these weird things. Like that's not American. That never has been. But that's like what everybody cares about, and it's like 401ks and retirements and don't take any risks and make sure that you have all your stuff. Like that's not American as far as I can tell. I don't know why. We're just like risk-taking. We were risk-taking people. We're not that way anymore. And I think there is a resurgence in this book. It feels like to the exact point that you're making, the American spirit seems to be like right there in the core of the book. Like whatever America is, however you articulate that and define it, and who knows, it's in this book. It seems like that's what I felt while reading it. I don't know if that's...
I mean, you have this like old canard of like, go west, young man, or, you know, like there's gold in them there hills, right? These things that capture aspects of that like westward expansion. And the way that Tocqueville describes it, he doesn't use exactly these terms, but scholars have kind of picked this up of, for a long time, the West acted as kind of a pressure release valve for some of the more adventurous parts of the young men in America, and in many ways it was healthy, right? Some of the romanticism we have about the Wild West and things is like these were young guys ultimately. Like when you look at the gunfight at the OK Corral, these guys are in their 30s, right? And they're like these are young people who are going out and charting a new course, and in some ways, obviously bad, like there are bad things that happen, but in some ways, like, hey, would you have rather them just hang around and make life worse for everybody else? No, they found an adventurous thing to do, and that's part of the American spirit. And we see that captured here, where like, especially when Adam is looking at that advertisement about the Salinas Valley, and it really is advertised as this like Edenic paradise. It's like, this is what we should be striving for. That's what it's sold to them as. And obviously Steinbeck complicates that. He's like, there are beautiful things about this valley. He clearly treasures growing up there, but it's also full of like strife and evil and hardship. And that's just what it means to be American. And I think that's really, really cool. Yeah.
You can see this in Steinbeck's writings too, and I haven't read a bunch of him, but I've read some of his book. Is it like The Bus or something? The one where the bus shows up at the mechanic shop, or it kind of, I don't know. I read like not much of it yet because I wanted to finish this one, but the idea,
Wayward Bus.
The Wayward Bus.
I've not read that one actually. Okay.
People like kind of coming through this town in California, I think. And it's sort of like explaining like, a lot of these guys want to go to Hollywood. They want to become actors and they want to do this and they want to do that. And it's just, you're sort of visualizing it from this perspective of this husband and wife who runs this, like, I think he's like a mechanic, or or maybe he runs the bus system in some ways. And his wife has like a little cafe diner shop that's attached to it. So people are coming in and out all the time. And hopefully that's not what it's about. Hopefully that is what it's about. But I think that's what it's about. And just the idea, like what he's trying to portray is that exact spirit. It seems like that's like at the center of his writings. And I don't like growing up. I mean, he was born in 1999, growing up, especially a lot of my life post 9/11. And you had things like, we would debate all day the Patriot Act and some of these things, like, was this good? Was this bad? What did this do to America? And then COVID and all these just strange things that have happened in our life. I think that, or in my lifetime and in the younger generations, there's like this gaping hole in the middle of the American spirit, and everybody's trying to figure out, what are we and where are we going? Are we going to be this sort of insurance obsessed, healthcare obsessed society that is just sort of like hoard all of the money, make sure that like, because I've been hearing for years, I don't know if you've heard any of this, but I've been hearing for years, like there's going to be this great transfer of wealth from the older generations to the other, and it's just like hasn't happened. It's just hasn't happened because like it's just not happening. And so
they're hanging on, we've improved healthcare. So they're hanging on still. We've improved our healthcare. So They're sticking around.
Exactly. And so like, it hasn't happened. Who knows if it will have, or how that's all going to work itself out, but there's not, I don't know. It just seems to me like I read this book and I'm like, that's a different country. That's like a different world.
Yeah.
I've never known that world. I've known remnants, or I've heard legends of that world. I've heard, great grandfather was in World War II. I've heard like the type of men that world created, but I don't know it. And I don't think a lot of people my age know that. And so I don't know. Like, I don't know. What do you think about that? And also, like, can this be recreated? Can we get this back or not?
I think one thing I might say that might be a slight pushback, I guess, is that I think this book is helpful for us if we're feeling a little too romantic about parts of the past, where I think Steinbeck is complicating all of that, where it's like you have the like Sam Hamilton generation, you have the World War I generation, which I know you said you haven't quite finished it yet. So World War I becomes very relevant for the very ending of the novel. But then you have the World War II generation that Steinbeck has lived through and sort of experienced. And he's kind of jaded about all of it. And so in a way, I think books like this are useful for us if we're tempted to, as the internet might say, like black pill a little too hard, right? Like it's nice to know, hey, people have thought it sucked for a long time. So actually, let me, if I can, I'm going to try to do this without going off on too much of a tangent. There's a really great passage.
Go off on the tangent because I want to know what this means, what you're saying. Yeah. There's
a really great passage in, it's John Adams' dissertation on canon and feudal law. It's a short text where he's basically saying, like, in the past, in medieval Europe, we had two different systems of law that worked to constrain us, and now we're free of that. And he says, one of the things that he's praising is like, our Puritan ancestors founded these universities and passed down to us these libraries that most of us today, by the way, can't even read because they're written in languages we're not learning anymore. So I like that because even in the late 1700s, you have somebody like John Adams doing the like boomer shaking fist at clouds thing, which is like they're not learning anything in these schools these days, right? They're not learning Hebrew and Greek anymore. And so that is cheering to me in a way where it's like I think you're right. Like I think there are things that we can look at and we're like, we've lost some stuff, and that's worth reflecting on and thinking about what things we have lost, how we could preserve the things we have and get back things we've lost or restore or whatever, however you want to phrase it. But also just kind of like take a deep breath and be like, we always kind of feel this way, and there are good things about living now. There are benefits to living now, and I'm kind of glad I'm not dying of preventable diseases and things like this.
Sure.
And here's all the benefits. And so that's one thing I think is good about this. Like Steinbeck, in the same way, that's what makes it so familiar to us. Is Steinbeck is lamenting the same way we want to lament. He's saying, like, look at the world that gave birth to somebody like a Sam Hamilton. Look at the world that gave birth to people who came west and there was land to get, and they built prosperous families and fortunes. Where is that now? Even in his time, it's hard to find. And also Steinbeck, about 10 years after East of Eden was awarded the Nobel Prize, and in his speech at the Nobel banquet, he basically just talked about nukes the whole time. And one thing that he says is like, what we've done in our era is we've unleashed powers that were reserved to God before. And he concludes with an analogy that is like, it's slightly heretical, but I think is actually really interesting. Where obviously, in John 1, we have this really amazing claim that, the Word became flesh. But before that, he says, the Word was with God, the Word was God. And what Steinbeck hones in on is that part where he says the Word was made flesh. He says the Word, I think the last line of it is like, the Word is man and the Word is with man. Basically, we use literature to interpret our humanity and what it means to be human. And so there's almost a divine character to that. Again, this is where it feels a little bit heretical, but bear with me. That like, God became man and experienced what it was like to be man. And we learn things about what it's like to be human from these really terrible stories, like the crucifixion narrative or like other stories that we tell. And so for Steinbeck, he's like, every day is something new, right? And for his time, it's like nukes. That's unprecedented. And we use literature to try to understand, interpret, and feel what it's like to be human with that new stuff. And I think that's just as true now as it was then. So I don't know if that actually answers any of your questions.
No. I don't think that's, I think that's, I don't think that's heretical.
Not totally heretical.
Heretical adjacent. It's the point there is incredibly important. And it is like, I don't know why I thought of Jadis in the Magician's Nephew and what's her world that she destroyed?
Chod or
Charn?
Charn,
Like that, yeah. And there's the word that would end the world, and there is this relationship, and that is a core central piece of what we've lost in America is through the postmodern revolution, the meaning of language and words and the significance in them have completely fallen away. Now they're just mechanisms of power, but there's a divine sense in that. And it's like, I don't know what all the theological details to this are, but like when I had met Jordan Peterson for the first time, he was doing a lecture with Brett Weinstein, not a Christian. Do you probably know Brett Weinstein?
Yeah, I know of him. Yeah.
Biological something or other, evolutionary biologist. And he said this thing, he was like, I've been studying this stuff for a long time. And he's like, the only distinction that I can find between human beings and all other animals is that we speak language. And it's like, of course, like obviously I think that is central to what it means to be made in the image of God, is that we have the capacity for language and words and putting and using that. And if you look at the Tower of Babel, it's like, God says the strangest thing ever in that. Like nobody ever talks about this, but God comes down and he sees what they're doing. And there's a sentence where God's like, now that they all share one language, there's nothing they can't do. Yeah. So there is a power in that. And I think Steinbeck, I haven't read what you were talking about, but based on how you were describing it, is picking up on some of that. Like there's a power in the language, and that is directly connected to divinity. I think. I don't know if that's heretical or not. I don't know what that is. I mean, some people have gotten frustrated because you can say, like, I think that there's almost no difference between the written Bible and Jesus Christ. Not because I don't think that Jesus became man. I do think that he became man, but I think that like the articulation of the truth is essentially the same as Christ. Like it's the exact same thing in some way. It would take like 10 more hours to flesh that out. But essentially when a culture has destroyed language in the way that we have, you lose all of that. And I don't think that the reason why I think it's a little bit different today than it was, say, 100 years ago is because there was, through the technological advancements of the modern age, you can destroy language and destroy your concept of a mimetic world for a poetic world. And you can do that fairly comfortably and in a way that's through technological advancements convincing. Like you can make the world into a bunch of raw material that you can form. And like, we kind of do that in a way. Like we got air conditioning, we've got all this stuff. Like we don't need the elements of the world don't impose upon us like they did to these people 150, 200,000 years ago. If it rained or if it didn't rain, like that's just what you dealt with. Like now we can just turn the water on. So that is all I think catechized the modern mind into thinking that language is just for power, and that the human experience is just this sort of like, you just make of yourself what you want. And so I don't know what that has to do with anything that we're talking about, but.
Well, I mean, I think one thing is that why I get frustrated with some of the critics of the book sometimes is I think they're coming to it with a kind of impoverished background in English language and English literature, where I think Steinbeck is somebody who, like modern 20th century American authors in many ways are breaking conventions and norms and things. But this is a book that is clearly like steeped in the tradition. Like you're getting allusions to scripture and to Shakespeare and all sorts of things. Like Steinbeck is steeped in it. And so one, if you're not already steeped in that, you might find some of it grating or you might be unfamiliar with it. But two, it's a thing that you could come to and find something really powerful in it, especially, Sam Hamilton is speaking in like King James English sometimes. And you're like, there's something compelling about this that I would like to learn and emulate. And it can be a strong draw. So I think, I mean, I think it's fair to complain of some of the ugliness we have to deal with today in literature and media and everything else. And then when you come to something like this, it's almost as dark as it can be, as depressing as it can be, as poking and prodding and questioning as it can be, like Sam Hamilton with like the raccoon, looking at the stone. Like it's questioning a lot of things we might hold sacred, but it's doing it in a way that by comparison to some of the stuff we're dealing with today is really refreshing, actually.
Right.
So I think that's a fair point.
And it's encouraging because the center of it is you can like the tides can turn. You never know what's going to happen. I've just finished watching Two Towers, Lord of the Rings stuff again, and it's like Battle of Helm's Deep. You just like, you never know if you keep fighting, if you keep trying to do the right thing. You never know when help is on the way. You just never know, and you never know when the tides can turn. So let me ask you one final question, because you did mention this, and then we can be done. It's obviously uniquely an American book. So you mentioned like it's in contention for one of the great American novel. I have not read all the great ones, and I'm naive, and I will say with pure confidence that I think it is, and that means nothing because I haven't read them. And so you've read more, like, if you do think it is the great American novel, the top one, why or why not? I guess if you don't.
It depends on my mood. I tend to say I think it is, for a couple of reasons. One of which is I think it's accessibility. The other contenders for great American novel tend to be things that are, I think, more challenging to wrestle with. So the other two that I think people raise most often are going to be like Moby Dick by Melville and Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And so those are going in opposite directions chronologically, but Moby Dick, like, it takes a while to convince somebody I should care about this book about whaling. It seems weird at first. Blood Meridian is like anything bad and evil and gross you find in this book, dial it up to 11 and it's way worse. So both of those are hard, I think, to sell people on. And so that for some people is a virtue.
Finn, is that in the conversation?
I don't. Probably it's probably up there.
Twain
is certainly one of the great American authors. Yeah.
Perks of Being a Wallflower.
No, I don't totally hate that book, but I understand. I have a deep loathing for it in a way. Like I have, when I think about what it was like to read that book, I have nothing but disgust. But then I think, anyways, we can talk about that.
Most of my disgust with the book is the fact that I didn't know East of Eden existed while they were making me read that crap.
Yeah, so that's fair. That's fair.
Come on. Yeah.
I think, I think there are books that should make you feel repulsed, and they do it in an artistic way, and that, maybe that's one of them. But so I think I would put it up for contention again, as I mentioned before, because I think it captures, I mean, really all parts of the American spirit in some ways. Like, you get this cross-generational story that is touching almost from the founding into the mid-20th century. You get the question of natives, you get the question of immigrants, you get all of these things, I think, in really compelling ways, and these wonderful characters to wrestle through it with. And so, I'd put it in strong contention. I think Moby Dick probably has a better claim just by being slightly older and having a sort of more grand and philosophical style in some ways. But one thing you mentioned early on is like the sort of feelings you get when you start reading this. One thing that for me marks a really good book is, even if I've never really experienced the world it's describing, I can feel it, I can see it, I can taste it, and I describe it as like I get nostalgic for a place I may never have been or a time I've never been. I feel that way about Cormac McCarthy's Border trilogy, all the pretty horses and the two novels that follow it. Like, I haven't spent a ton of time in the American Southwest, but I read those books and I'm like, let's go to Mexico, man. Like, I want to experience it, right? And the same thing with this is like, I've spent a very little time in the Salinas Valley, but like when I got there, I was just like, I mean, it's very different, obviously, than when he was there, but I was like, I get it,
No, I think I completely get that. And I think it is sort of like, I don't know what this is, but I kind of do, because it's embedded in the American heritage that it's somewhere back there. It's like, whatever this thing is somewhere, whether your family has been here. I mean, if your family has been here for a long time, especially, it's like there somewhere, whatever that is there. And so and that's the beauty of, I mean, that's why culture and heritage and these things are important, because it can you inherit that, and then you learn it, and you find it out, and you figure out what it is. One day we should do a podcast on Moby Dick. That's my next one that I've never read.
I'll tell you, there's an audiobook by what's his name? I'm forgetting right now. William something. The guy who plays Porkins in the first Star Wars movie is a Shakespearean actor, and before he died in the mid 2000s, he recorded an audiobook of Moby Dick that is amazing. And so if sometimes it's free on Audible, you should look at that. But that if you like audiobooks, it's great. I've both read it and listened to the audiobook, but it's, what's his name now? I'm forgetting.
William Hootkins.
Yes, William Hootkins. He has an amazing like Shakespearean voice. And
Really?
the reason I recommend the audiobook is the times I've tried to read it before the audiobook, I did not realize how funny of a book it was. Moby Dick is a hilarious book, and you should be laughing at many points. It gets dark, obviously midway through, but it's funny, and he captures it like oh, it's so good. Yeah, highly recommend that. Yeah.
Okay. That's the next one that I was gonna go to. Yeah, smoke cigars and listen to Moby Dick. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. I think that this is obviously one of the great American novels, and there's questions at the core of America right now, and I think this book should help people answer some of those questions, or at least give them a map for how to get to the answer. And I think, your knowledge on it is very helpful. So I really appreciate you coming on and doing this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me. I love talking about this kind of stuff. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks for watching this interview. Just wanted to remind you to go on over to theparadoxpress.com right now. Check out the new site, check out the new essays, check out the old essays, check everything out. Give us your email, sign up for our newsletter, and we will send everything for free to your inbox every single week. Podcast, essay, we'll send it all over there. It is a new publication for setting forth a vision for conservatism and for Christians in America. And so going over to theparadoxpress.com, theparadoxpress.com. The link is in the description.